everyone and welcome back. Today we're talking about My Brilliant Friend Season 3 Episode 4, Cold War. And this was by far my favorite episode so far. I enjoyed watching Elena adjust to married life, right? She's having a hard time. She describes marriage as a prison. And I think she feels getting married has totally violated her boundaries. Like she literally doesn't know where she begins or where she ends. And I also enjoyed watching how politics affects the daily lives of Italians. Because at one point, her husband says to her, "I don't want a maid. I will not have a slave in my house." So it seems like politics isn't something that people just talk about outside of the home. It's like very much in the home. And also the clear divide in terms of like gender roles between men and women. Because as soon as Elena and Pietro get married, I found it stunning that his room, his study, was across the hall from, I believe, the baby's room. And he was just unbothered. Right? Like he does his work and the wife takes care of the baby. So these gender roles are very deep and they don't extend just from the outside, but in the home as well. And you see that in which rooms Pietro spends his time in and which rooms Elena spends her time in. I also liked the fact how they kind of showed people's mental state, right? Like Elena's paranoia, you know, seeing the different characters. You don't know what's real, what's not. I like kind of just showing us and not narrating it to us. So visually, it was really good because you find a way to get inside her head without getting inside her head, if that makes sense. Like instead of talking at us, you get to see it. So you get to experience kind of like the sort of intensity that she's feeling. So visually, it was stunning. And it was great. Like I really enjoyed it. So in the last episode, Elena took care of Lila, and this seems to affect Lila's ability to speak freely. So it's not until the end of the episode that Elena and Lila's, I guess, Cold War finally ends and that they're able to actually speak freely. So right from the start, Elena is not having it with Lila. And she's frustrated because she's still known as Lila's friend. And anyone who's had this type of relationship, like it can be very annoying when you're that friend that people always ask somebody else about. You know, it can be very annoying if you're that friend that, you know, you're just kind of in the background. People are more interested in this person you hang out with than you. So she calls Nadia's mother and Nadia's mother says, "Okay, come over, but bring Lila." And Elena's annoyed that this woman asks Lila to come, and she's also annoyed that Lila didn't turn it down. So they make it over to her house, and we see Nadia and Pascal, and they are just living la vida loca. And Pascal gives it to Elena, right? They don't like each other very much. Pascal sees her as kind of like bougie, as someone who's too good for everyone. And he basically scolds her for her article, and he says, "Listen, what you did helped no one." And coming from them, I thought that was rich. And Elena fights back. She said, "Well, you're terrible too," basically. And he really goes in on her, and the whole thing is just, they just don't like each other. And Nadia's mom comes home, and Nadia's mom is clearly ashamed of Nadia, right? And, you know, she's raised this young woman in, you know, an affluent home or, you know, a well-off home. And, you know, here she is half naked in front of her guests. So Elena, Lila, and Nadia's mom sit down. And Lila's attitude, this whole conversation, like, she was just biting her tongue, right? She was cringing, and rightfully so. And so Elena and Nadia's mom get to talking, and the first thing they talk about is her marriage. And the more Elena talks about her marriage, the more annoyed Nadia's mother gets, because here's this girl from like this poor background, and she's marrying way above her class. And here's her daughter with this like bricklayer. And the conversation turns like passive aggressive, because at one point Nadia's mother turns to Lila and says, "You've done such great work at the factory," basically throwing shade at Elena. That's how I took it, at least. Elena is annoyed, right? She's annoyed because first Lila is getting attention and she's getting praise, and she tries desperately to like sort of get back in Nadia's mother's good graces. But it just makes her look worse, right? She offers to sign her book, but Nadia's mother never asked for her signature. So the whole thing was just weird and like desperate, and Lila was just looking at her like, so they leave the house and immediately Lila goes in on her. She's like, listen, you shouldn't have done any of that. That woman was bitter as hell. You should have seen it. You should have done this. You should have done that. You should have. And everything Lila was saying was true, but there's a time and a place. And this was not the time or the place to be going in on Elena. And Elena was annoyed, right? She's like, girl, I wish she was dying. At least that would justify her shitty behavior. And Elena took that as an affront, right? She's like, you know, you're like adding salt to the wound. And I get why she felt that way, but Lila is Lila, you know, like you're just like, I felt for both of them in that moment. And so that conversation begins like their Cold War, a Cold War that only Elena is aware of and not Lila. And so we cut to the main event, which is Elena's wedding. And Elena's wedding took me by surprise because it just happened, right? There's no lead up to it. You know, they're driving, they're arguing, and I was like, what's happening here? So before their wedding, Elena tells Pietro like, hey, by the way, I want to take the pill and I don't want to have our first child until after I write my second book. And he's immediately like, you're telling me this now? Like, talk about a time and a place. And his whole thing is like, the point of getting married is to have kids. Why can't you do both at the same time? And this whole conversation of doing both at the same time just shows you how dense people are in terms of like the level of responsibility and work it takes to run a household. And I was watching this podcast, or not podcast, but there is a talk before and after the show on CrowdFest, I believe. Like, I'll link it down below, called Our Brilliant Friend. And one of the points they make is that Italy is a patriarchy run by a matriarchy. And you see that throughout this episode. And so he's annoyed and he's like, can we just get married and talk about this later? And the ceremony was simple. It was just very clean. And so they get married, and shortly after they have a reception. And they weren't supposed to have a reception, but they have a reception. And Elena has broken through, right? Like, she fits in, she's one of them. She looks the part, right? She's being introduced to different people, and she fits right in. And there's a scene between Elena and her mom where they're just kind of looking at each other. And like, she's really proud of her, right? She's like, oh my God, like, my daughter made it. And Elena, you know, like, she was really enjoying the attention, right? People are flirting with her. She's flirting right back, you know? So you're seeing sign of like red flags already in terms of Elena's sort of fear about what's going to happen, like what is life after marriage. And then we get to Elena's first night with her husband, and it was interesting because I think she has love for her husband, but at the same time she's not 100% satisfied, because during this time she kind of compares him to other people, and she says he struggled and I struggled. So he's trying to give her what she wants, and she's trying to give him what he wants, and it's to a point where both of them are playing a role that they can't really maintain for a long time. And you see this when she gets pregnant. Hard as Elena tried, she got pregnant, right? Initially the plan was to get pregnant after her first baby, but God plans, and then, you know, you plan and God plans. And she calls Lila, you know, and Lila immediately says, hey, were you mad at me? Like, is that why you didn't call me? And Elena's like, no, not at all. Like, what's up? And Lila is doing well. So although she's not the main character this episode, we do see her progression, you know, especially in comparison to the last one. It seems like Enzo is doing very well. You know, she's kind of come out of that sickness that she was in, and she's in a comfortable place. She talks about never wanting to be pregnant again. She's taking the pill, and Enzo seems fine with it. And Lila's pregnancy and Elena's pregnancy, you know, the comparisons are interesting because Elena refuses to compare. Like, let Lila get inside her head, right? Anytime Lila talked about how negative her experience was, how terrible, because in the last episode she said she got pregnant without pleasure. Like, it was kind of a horrible experience for her from beginning to end. She even says point blank, like, pregnancy ruins women's lives, like the pill is better. So as soon as Lila starts talking about, you know, like how terrible it was and how tiring it was, like, Elena puts up the phone, right? She doesn't want any of this negativity in her head. And I think Elena as much as she doesn't want to admit it, a lot of the things that Lila was saying, she could relate to. But she really wants to prove a point, right? Like, she's nothing like her friend. So she goes through this pregnancy, and at face value, you know, Elena's giving off the impression that it was smooth. You know, she says the day that her daughter was born, she felt strong. She felt like it was a beautiful experience. But behind her words, you know, you're not really that convinced. They named the baby after Pietro's mother, Adele, you know, just as a form of respect. And after she gives birth, she talks to Lila, right? And Lila was like, how was it? And Elena just refuses to give her an inch, right? Like, anytime Lila asks, Elena's response is, everything is fine. And obviously everything is not fine. And then Pietro's gift was super interesting. Like, he gives her a notebook, basically saying, I don't want you to lose the habit of writing, which is like, you know, again, that disconnect, like the amount of work you have to do in raising a kid, let alone raising a kid and writing a book, is just not something that he can relate to. And so the reality of having a baby sets in. And I appreciated this whole sequence on like Elena's depression, because they, instead of telling us, they show us, right? Like, visually this episode was stunning, because you feel like you're inside Elena's head, you know, like you kind of break down with her. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that they don't just narrate what's going on in her head, like they show us. And one of the ways they do this is through Elena's paranoia. So having a baby has completely wore her out, right? She's exhausted, she's tired, you know, she feels like she's doing it alone. So on top of raising this kid, she's also cooking, cleaning, ironing, like she's doing everything. And it is important to know, like, in the household, especially in these hyper sort of patriarchal societies, the mother has so much power in the house, you know, like so much power in the house. And this is a power that people don't really understand or see, like, unless you're part of that culture, you would not know it. And so as far as what goes on in the home, that's the mom's job. That ain't his problem. He goes out and works, right? And that's it. And so she starts having these like paranoias. You know, she sees Giola at her window saying, Lila kills babies. And initially when we saw Giola's face, I thought she was there. Like the way they shot her paranoia, like I actually couldn't tell what was real and what wasn't. And it was really well done. And so the idea of a baby carriage just disgusts her, right? Like she's looking at that carriage like, get away from me. She has a dream about her mother coming in saying, oh, your friend gave you the evil eye. You know, like all these kind of pent up emotions just come out. And again, like I didn't know what was real or not. I thought her mom was actually there, you know, like, and that Elena may have called her mom and her mom came over and, you know. So the way they weaved in her fantasy was very well done. And so she's fed up, she's tired. And the way this sort of mental frustration manifests itself physically, she literally starts to develop a limp very similar to her mother. And that was her fear, right? Like she didn't want to become her mother, just in a nicer home. And so she's fed up and she confronts her husband and she says, listen, like you need to sort yourself out. Like I'm tired, I'm sick and tired of being tired. We don't go out anymore. And that's the thing, right? Like when you're courting someone, you go out, you do all these fun things. But the minute you're married, it's over, right? You're in the house, that's it. No more fun times. It's time to get to work. And she's like, you lied, you know, like you portrayed yourself as this modern, you know, person and you're just the same. And that's the thing, like gender norms have, like, there's politics and then there's gender norms. And so the way Pietro is able to separate that, you know, he's like, listen, we can't have a maid in this house because that's slavery. But like you as a mom, like that's your job. He's not really getting it, you know, and the way Elena phrased it was like, oh, so you'd rather have, so I'm just a loyal housewife or a loyal maid. You want me to be the slave? And you know, when she puts it that way, he's like, okay, yeah, I guess we can get a maid. But the way he kind of looked at the idea of having a maid as slavery, you know, again shows you that first, like politics really affects the household, and second, just how deep these gender norms are, because his suggestion for Elena is maybe you should call another mom. Like, call your mom, call my mom, call whoever, just call some other woman to help you with this. Like, this ain't my problem. Like, he never offers himself as someone to help. Like, he's just like, I don't know. You know, like, this is your job, you need to take care of it. And so his suggestions were not helpful, and he never offers himself as a part of the solution. And so she gets the maid, and it's a year and a half later, and nothing has changed. She's still unable to write anything of value, and she has this obsession with writing something great, right? She wants to write something great. And like, she's just kind of paralyzed because she doesn't know what that is. And in part, she's paralyzed because she's thinking, what would Lila do, right? Like, Lila's so brave, and here I am. You know, if Lila had half the resources that I have. And a lot of her obsession with Lila, I think, is because she knows deep down that her last book wasn't that good, and that she hasn't really lived up to her potential. Like, she doesn't know what her voice is, but she's just too scared to kind of confront that reality right away. And so an interesting scene happened when Pietro, basically they have a get-together. So Elena's sick and tired of being sick and tired, and she's like, listen, we never go out anymore. And he's like, okay, fine, like, you can invite these people over. So they're talking, and at one point he leaves the table, and there's a conversation had about obscenity. And Elena says, well, I'm poor, so we've never found an alternative to obscenity. And a lot of the chip on her shoulder, I think, is because this first book is a success, but that doesn't mean it's good. And it was a success because it was obscene. And so she has this kind of like uncertainty where she doesn't know if she's good or not. And so by writing something important, she can prove like, okay, I'm not just a one-hit wonder. I think they say like most people have one book in them, but most people, they don't really have two. And so she's looking for inspiration in all the wrong places. One of these places being this other man's house. And although she didn't fully have an affair with him, like, I'm not really sure what went on here. So she goes over to this man's house, frustrated, thinking about Lila, how brave she was for leaving her husband behind and starting this new life. But a lot of the parallels she's making between her and Lila don't apply to Elena, right? Like she's trying to draw them, but they're not exactly the same. And at one point she's like, I brought you another eraser. So I'm not sure if the erasers were to suggest she's been here before. You guys let me know what you think. But, you know, she leaves, but she's totally frustrated. And she expresses this frustration to her husband, and she says, listen, like, I did not study all these years to become a loyal housewife. Like, that's just not my job. And I will say this about their marriage, like, there is something modern about it, because at one point she tells him to wear a condom. And wearing a condom as husband and wife during this time it's just not something you would do, I feel like. Because first, you're Catholic, so you're supposed to have kids. And the fact that she gives him the condom and he just puts it on, I thought was also, you know, in terms of like that, at least they're trying to control how many kids they have and what time period. Because Elena at this point, she's not ready for a second child. Right? It's been a year and a half, almost 2 years. Like, she needs to write this book first. And as hard as she tries to explain this to him, like, he's not really listening. And so she's at a dead end, and who does she call? Lila. This final conversation between Lila and Elena is the beginning of the end for Elena, right? So Lila, again, although we don't see her, every time she comes on screen, there seems to be some improvement in her life. And whereas Elena, like, seems to be getting worse. And so Lila basically informs Elena that the issues with the communists and the fascists, it's getting worse and it's getting more violent. And the way they show this is nice because like they show this in sort of flashbacks, but the way, I don't know, like the way they kind of show how bad things are getting, like you sense that violence and that darkness beneath, you know, like it does a good job of capturing that. So again, I like that they're showing us and they're not just telling us over the phone. So again, visually, this episode was great. And so they're talking about this, and then Lila starts to retell a story from their childhood about, I guess, you guys are gonna have to fill me in on this, but this is a story that she told her long ago about the sort of families in the neighborhood and why certain families have power, why other families lost power, And she talks about the mysterious murder of this one man who was stabbed in the neck. And as she's telling the story, Elena is getting super inspired, right? And she's so inspired to the point where she starts writing. And the issue with her writing is that she's writing with Lila in her head, right? Like, it's not really her voice, it's Lila's voice in her head. And Elena's whole, like, I want to write about something important is interesting, because writing is one of those things, right? Because everything has been said. It's not what you say, it's how you say it. And no one can be you. So you have to write in a way that's you. And if you're unable to figure out who you are, nothing, like, everything you write will come off pretentious or try hard or copycat. And so Elena's like, finally, I found the important thing that I can write about. But she's writing it from somebody else's vantage point. And so 1 month goes by, she submits the book to Pietro's mother. And I thought it was interesting that Pietro said he hadn't read the book, because I think that's BS. Like, he definitely read the book, but he didn't want to hurt her feelings, I feel like. And that was my first red flag, where I was like, ooh, maybe the book is really bad. And so she's waiting for it. And he even says, you know what, maybe, girl, you should call my mom. You should call her yourself, because this is none of my business. Like, he doesn't want to say anything. And so she sits next to Adele, and Adele just breaks it to her. She says, the book is pretentious, it's chaotic, it's unpublishable. It just comes off as someone trying to write a great book. And Elena's really confident, right? She's like, I put myself in it. And the way Elena tries to explain her book, right? She's kind of saying, like, the style in which the book is written represents my background. And again, there's what you do and how you do it. And if you're trying to do something that you think is great, you will likely fail, because you're mimicking, you're not creating anything. And so Adele's mom is just like, sis, it's a no from me. And unpublishable is code for, this isn't even obscene, right? At least her last book, there's an audience for it. This is just, it's not entertaining and it's not good, which is the two worst things. I feel like you could get published if it's entertaining, or if it's like obscene, hence 50 Shades of Grey. Like, it doesn't have to be good writing, but it has to be one or the other. So Adele's mom was just like, listen, I can't help you out, sis. And so she's at rock bottom, right? Elena is at rock bottom, and she calls the only person that she can call, which is Lila. And Lila at first doesn't tell her anything. And then this kind of Cold War that they're having, it kind of breaks down. And Lila says, listen, this was a bad book. And it was bad because nothing you've done is you. It doesn't resemble you at all. And she's like, girl, if you're bad, what does that say about me? And Lila's point is, like, she's real, right? At first she tries to be she tries to beat around the bush and says, well, I forgot, I lost the skill to read. And then she goes, nah, this is just really bad. And then she adds insult to injury, and she said, your last book was really bad too. Like, all of it, nothing was good. Nothing you've done is good. And Elena is crying, in part because she knows that Lila is right, and in part because she didn't listen to herself. Like, I think she had this fear. And that's the scary thing when you expose yourself as a writer or as an artist. Like, people are able to judge you. And it's scary because ideally you want it to be genius. But when it's not, it's quite hurtful. It really hurts your ego. And Lila's point is, you have no imagination, basically. And the reason Elena doesn't have imagination is because she's relying on Lila's voice to give her that imagination. Like, until she's able to kind of separate the two comfortably, she's not going to be able to find any type of anything. And so the episode ends with Elena running to her husband. Her husband he doesn't say anything. He's just like, yeah, like, so he's very like, and she says that night she dreamt about her second daughter. So it seems like she's going to get pregnant for a second time. And so this was a terrible moment for Elena, but also a good one, a happy one, because now the the ice has thawed, right? Like the truth is out in the open. And so what she does with that, we'll see. So anyways, you guys let me know what you think.